In this screen recording, I'll be demonstrating some new functionality in the gpxr tool. The first demonstration I did of this showed how to smooth the corners of a GPX file created with Ride with GPS and modify elevation data. Some new functionality is available now that I'll demonstrate here. In particular, it's functionality to create a loop and kind of generally clean up the geospatial content of a route that you're working on. So we'll go and find a route. In this case, this is a route that I created just based on a ride from Strava. So here we are, felt awful, rode anyways. I've uploaded that and we'll click done. And this can take some time to load. And you can see I actually have a previous session already loaded. So this is the track that's loading. This can take some time to load. So while that's loading, I'll walk through these menus. There's a little bit of help text here that just should get people started. And there's now a geospatial modification mode dropdown. So the original demonstration or the original version of this app was this modify horizontal curvature workflow. And I've added make loop, resample track, and simplify track. So make loop is just that. It allows you to create loops out of courses like this one where things might overlap. Say you did a 20 lap race and you want to extract one loop from that race. Or like this ride, you rode out, did a loop, and you want to just pull that portion of the file out. It allows you to do that. So I'll just demonstrate a little bit of how that might work. So if you want to do that for one of your files, you can. So we're going to zoom in on where I want the loop to start and stop. So this is a loop out near Cottage Grove, Wisconsin. And if we zoom way in here, we can see the actual GPX recorded points. If you click on these points, you can see their IDs. So down here, that's ID 1578. That's ID 2769. So that tells us that, so 1578 is earlier in the ride, so that tells us that this is probably the start of the loop and this is the end of the loop. So what we're going to do to create the loop is first zoom to where we want to create it. We're going to select a start point and an end point. And there's a couple options. So we can, it's actually not required to create a geospatial point for this, but we can add a connecting curve that would use, this is the same as the modify horizontal curvature workflow. So if I now were to run this, this would create a curve that connects this, this end location to the start location. The other thing we can do is change the loop start. And this is it's kind of a funny thing, but if you don't want the lap to start at this particular location, you can either off the elevation or from clicking around up here, choose a particular point ID that you want as your start finish. So I happen to know that it's right here, and so we're going to click there. I'll close out a previous error. Sorry about that. I'll click there on the elevation, and we can see now this max elevation. So I want my loop to end right at the peak of that hill. And so I've got my max elevation is ID 2749. So I'll take 2749 and put it in here as my loop start ID. And then I'll go ahead and add the connecting curve, just because the course that or the loop that I did didn't actually do quite what I want for my magic road. So if I click go do it, okay, it's going to go off. It's probably already done this in the background, and now it's just re-rendering. It's going to go off and create, there it is, create a kind of 10-point connected curve. And if we now are to click around here, we can see, let's go to the ends mode rather than point geometry. Okay, we can see that's ID 4. And there's ID 1199. So this is ID 1198, and there's ID 7. So our start finish is somewhere in this area. One of these. There we go. There's point 1 that I just clicked as the red dot there. So now our start finish is where I want it to be, essentially. And if we were come down to look at this elevation profile, we'll see that, yeah, there's this small climb essentially up to the finish. Okay, so that's cool. That kind of demonstrates the full suite of functionality. You can not add the connecting curve, so you can turn that off. And this is especially useful if you have multiple laps of the same course and you just want to pick kind of 2 points, one that's your start, one that's your end, and not worry about how they connect, not adding a connecting curve. And then the other thing you can do is obviously not change the start location. So if you don't enter anything here, it'll just use where you cut the loop, basically your start identifier, your start location, the minimum ID in the loop that you create will be the start of the loop. Okay, so that's cool, and trial and error is your friend here, but this should get people a long way down the road of creating loops out of either GPX tracks they've created or things they've created with routes previously or whatever. So, okay, so the next mode I want to show is this resample track, and this is really helpful if you have a course like this where, for whatever reason, my GPS has a number of kind of funny dropouts or missing data. The other reason that this would be really helpful is if you've hand digitized, say in Ride with GPS, and you have kind of variable point spacing, and you want to do an elevation smoothing that uses a number of points as your kind of smoothing window. This resample tolerance or this resampling tool will basically give you an even point spacing so that your elevation smoothing works better. So I'm going to use an elevation tolerance of 5, and this is in meters. I think this will allow you to do 1 through 10. I didn't want to kind of get carried away and let people go too fine and too coarse. You're going to start to miss corners and that kind of thing. So you definitely want to stay in that kind of 5 range to capture the curvature of your corners. So I'm just going to do 5 and say go do it. And so it's going to go off and do a linear interpolation in X, Y, and Z for all of the track. So the way this is actually working in the background is it looks across this distance, it creates a set of points along that distance, and then it runs a pretty simple linear interpolation using the R function approximate. And so you see here we got back points that are nicely spaced all the way along, and it looks like, as you would expect from, let's go back to that mode so we can see the IDs. And so we have 27, 29, and 1. All right, after a minor interruption, we're back. So we can see now we have nice even spacing for all these points. And what this is going to allow us to do is, and I'll just demonstrate this with kind of an aggressive smoothing tolerance, but say I put in a 20-point smoothing tolerance. This is actually going to be smoothing over a maximum window size of 20 times 5 meters, where before with the uneven point spacing, that would have been a kind of the window size is super variable based on the spacing of the points. So if we now go preview smooth elevation, this is going to go and modify the elevation profile and give us back here we go. All right, so you can see now in red is the original curve and in black is the smoothed curve. And note, you can go in and add verticals at these. So I could, instead of, we'll go undo. I'm realizing, so the time that it takes here is to redraw, and this is probably something I'm going to work on improving in my next round of development, but apologies for the slightly laggy drawing. Okay, so we could say add a control point. Let's just use this one. We could add a control point here and just say that max elevation is 1972, so I'm looking here. So let's use 0.1972, and we'll keep a tolerance of 20. And now if I preview smooth elevation, we'll see a vertical line here, and this point should be maintained at that elevation. All right, well, that's redrawing. I'll go and start talking about the next. Okay, so that's Resample Track. The last one is Simplify Track, and this the order that I'm doing this in is kind of the order that I would expect. Okay, so that finished drawing, and you can see now that this maintained that particular elevation. So you can put in these control points and basically make sure that the particular elevation locations you want are hit, and other things are kind of smoothed over as you want. And you can kind of change this window size, which I talked about in the last demonstration. Okay, so the simplification is something I haven't really played with a lot. It was easy to add, so I figured I'd go ahead and put it in. So this is actually going to take out points, which may not be something you want to do, but something that could be really useful. So realizing I dropped out the undo button, that'll be back before you see this video. But so if I just put in a simplification tolerance of 0.1 meters, and I go do it, this is going to remove any point that doesn't move the track horizontally by more than 0.1 meters. So you can see the elevation profile is maintained for the most part. I suppose if you had a very straight road going over the top of a hill, it might cut the peak off in a strange way. But what it's done, and you can see that it rendered a lot faster, is it removed points in straight lines and straight parts of the road. And this is especially useful if you have a GPX file, as I have experienced, that has some strange wandering behavior in roads that are otherwise straight. It's visually just annoying when you're riding RGT. So, so that's what I have. Okay, after 2 interruptions from a child, just as a quick recap, in this video I did not run the modify horizontal curvature at all. I did use the basic concept of that modify horizontal curvature for adding a connecting curve from a start to an end of a loop that I wanted to create. This could just be extending a straight line. It could be adding curvature like this. It's just a useful thing you could do. And that's in this make loop mode. I then used resample to get an even spacing on the points, which then allowed me to run elevation smoothing on the elevation profile, which you can see here. And then I simplified the track to take any kind of very small wandering kind of glitches out of the lines, and it should be all ready to upload to RGT. So once that's done, you can click Save Track. It's going to save to a gpxr out.gpx file that you can rename and do with what you want. And yeah, hopefully this is helpful for folks. I know I've heard a number of these requested from people, and I've used them all to date, either in scripts or in this app, to set up some routes for various events. So cheers, and we'll see you around.